welcome to the BFSI.com. My name is Amol Dete and you're watching FinTech Diary. In this episode, I have with me Harshil Mathur from Razorpay, and we're going to talk about payment gateway, payment aggregator, and the whole lot of payment specifically at FinTech Diary show. Harshil, glad to have you.
Hey, hi Amol.
To begin with, I have a very, very funny, soft question. By any chance, if you're gone to some merchant's shop buying something, and if you have received a message the payment failed, what did you do?
It has happened at times. Actually, my team tells me I'm the biggest tester of Razorpay merchants.
Okay.
Because I keep testing out random Razorpay merchants and trying to do payment there. And if it gets stuck, I just immediately give a call. Sometimes it's my issue, sometimes it's a bank issue, sometimes it's something else. But I give a call, why did this payment fail? So as a payment enthusiast and as a founder building on payments, I think payment failures is my biggest enemy. So I have to fight it wherever I find it.
Okay. You don't go back to the office and take the case of the teams, or you just try to
call,
develop a product.
can we figure out why did it fail? Like was this issue? How do we avoid it happening again?
Right.
And like there's a lot of such failures we've reduced over the years.
Right.
There's still failures that exist in the ecosystem, but I think we're getting there.
Yeah. So to begin with, you have been an old player now, and in fact, one of the powerful player in the payment space as such, Harshil. Where are you today in terms of maybe profit, in terms of the business value? Have you made the value that you wanted? Because a lot of top investors have, bet on Razorpay, huge investments for sure. So have you actually built that value that you wanted to build?
I think if you ask me that I wanted to build, I think our ambition knows no bounds. So I feel still very early. If you look at the opportunity that India presents, I think there's still a lot more to do. But yeah, when we are glad we have reached where we have. I think we have created an immense value for our merchants. Today we are the largest payment gateway in the country.
Right.
We have the largest number of entered merchants on our platform. And the scale at which we are processing volume, we are now doing about $180 billion of volume on our platform. And I think that's larger than anyone else in the ecosystem. And that gives us a lot of, I think more than anything else, that excites me because there are so many merchants that we are solving payment acceptance for.
Right.
I think I still try to meet at least one customer a week. And that's one of the most fun times for me through the entire week, because when I meet those customers...
Do they talk about payment failures?
Yeah, of course. We talk about everything. I ask them what are their top challenges, what are the things that they want you to fix, not just with Razorpay, but in general in the financial ecosystem, what are the challenges for them and what can we do tomorrow to fix it? And that's how most of our roadmap has been built. We started as a payment gateway, we over time went into Razorpay, which is neo-banking and payroll and vendor payments. We've now went into offline with POS because we saw a lot of merchants ask us that, hey, online is fine, but we also have offline. Combine those two. So most things that we have built have come out of those conversations. So that's one of the most exciting things for me.
Yeah. So I will speak to you specifically on online and offline a little later. But tell me something. Since you have been operating since so long now, has the customer acquisition, which generally the payment aggregators do, or the payment gateways, but for you, the merchant acquisition cost has come down? How much it is, and how are you trying to reduce that cost specifically?
It has significantly, and the primary reason is that like when we started the company, we didn't have to just convince them that, hey, use Razorpay. We first had to convince them, hey, use digital payments. Most of the merchants, like I remember I used to go to education institutes and colleges and door to door and try to sell them payment gateway. And like half of them would laugh us at like, hey, why should I do digital payments? My students' parents will come and pay in whatever form I accept money anyways.
Yes.
So they'll come and pay cash, they'll come and pay check. How does it matter if I make it more convenient?
Yes.
What is it doing for me?
Yes.
Right? To today, where no business can survive with digital payments, I think we've come a long way. So that, of course, the tax go down because of that. Because today, we have to just convince that, hey, we are the best payment gateway. I don't have to convince them, hey, use digital payments. That part is done. And I think a lot of that is, I'll say, is efforts of players like us, but a lot of it is also credit to the government and the policymakers. Because of whole Digital India drive, because of the whole digitization drive, today I don't have to go and teach people why digital payments is useful for you.
Yes.
And that's a big delta from where we started as a company.
Agree. Obviously, DPI is a great story, no doubt about it. UPI is a great story. But when it comes to, again, the merchant acquisition, how much was the cost earlier? How much is the cost now? How much was the time earlier? How much is the time now? And how many customers, specifically the merchants for you, are you onboarding on a daily basis, per minute, per second?
A lot of these things have changed over time. There are exact numbers because exact numbers don't matter. But like if I take CACs have gone down almost a factor of 5x in the last 4 years. Simply because I think pre-COVID to post-COVID only it changed a lot. Before that, pre-demonetization to post-demonetization it changed a lot. So in like 5-7 years, I think that cost has come down at least 5x, if not more. And simply because there's more awareness. Now everyone wants to digitize because of demonetization, because of COVID and other things. Like people know that, hey, digital payments is important for me right out of the gate. So I think that is one. In terms of number of merchants onboarded, like we today onboard about somewhere between 20 to 30,000 merchants a month.
Okay.
And that's a significant scale for because it's merchants, it's businesses, like even a large business counts as one. But that also shot up a lot, like from while that is the average count in just we were not onboarding till December. So since December when we started onboarding,
Great.
for 2 months, in just 2 months of post onboarding, we onboarded 1 lakh merchants in just 2 months. So that's more than like what we onboarded in 3, 4, 5 months.
Okay.
Because of the pace at which a lot of these merchants wanted to come to us. Of course, a lot of these things will change as regulations evolve. So, for example, the way we used to onboard, the kind of KYC we used to do 10 years back, today the kind of KYC norms are there. Of course, there is also slowness on that because there's a lot more checks and balances that are needed, a lot more deeper diligence that we do as per requirements now. So I think that part has also changed. But at the same time, the merchant awareness has gone up. So there's a lot more intent behind sign up now. Like when a merchant signs up today, they want to go live. Earlier, the merchant would sign up, go live, but then not start using.
Yes.
Say, my cash is going on.
Yes.
And that part has changed. So there is a combination of factors, but net is the ecosystem is moving towards a lot more efficiency, towards a lot more speed, but at the same time, a lot more checks and balances as well.
Yes. Let me learn more from specifically on the merchant part from you. So how long does it take, for example, for you, because you're one of the top player and a profitable one also, to make your one merchant profitable, or the cost that perhaps you invest in one merchant, how long does it take for you to make profitable?
See, on a unit economics level, you make money on every transaction. So we don't lose money on any transaction because we are a B2B business.
Yes.
In our case, it doesn't make sense to, like, we're not a consumer company. We can't lose money for years and onboard a customer and then assume that, hey, at some point we'll monetize it. Like, our monetization happens on day one. And it's business, it's simple. We are delivering value to you, you give us money for it. This is how businesses operate. It's very simple and economical. On a CAC basis, I think it takes us about 3 months to break even a merchant. So if you onboard a merchant, it takes us about 3 months for the merchants to start, for the merchant to recover the entire CAC that we have incurred. That's on average.
Okay.
But then our stickiness is very high. On an average, a merchant who's stayed with us for 3 months ends up staying with us for at least 24 months. So the churn rates are very low because the merchants in this ecosystem, as long as we are giving them best product, best service, they continue to stay with us. The majority of churn, even like 3 years out that I'm saying, is mostly because of mortality.
Okay.
Because there are a lot of small merchants that die, change businesses, shift to doing something else, and so on. That is part and parcel. But the stickiness is very high.
The longevity is there.
Stickiness is very high. Very high. And that's because of it could be different for different players, but that's because of the kind of ecosystem that we have, the kind of product depth that we have. That once a merchant goes live with us, they love our product depth and they don't want to shift out of it.
Okay. So before I again move to online and offline, tell me more about in terms of how do you make profits with the merchants? In terms of, do you charge them a processing fees? You charge them specifically on the transactions? Because ultimately,
it's a combination of things. So we charge them multiple things. So first type of fees is what we charge a platform fees.
Yes.
This is like providing a lot of services on the platform like MIS, dashboard, reporting, so on. So we charge them a platform fee for usage of platform services like our checkout.
And which automatically helps them to build their own credit score, right?
So that is one. Then we charge them SaaS fee for additional value-added services that we have. For example, the merchants who use subscription management from us, so we charge them a SaaS fee, per month fees for that. The merchants who want a dedicated support desk, we charge them a SaaS fee for that. The merchants who use like vendor payments and multiple other things on top, again we charge SaaS fee for that. The third kind of payment that happens is where we charge them an additional fee for specific unique features, like they use us SMS delivery. A lot of merchants use us to send payment links and payment pages where we charge them SMS cost for delivering every payment link, every payment page. That is a per delivery cost and so on. So those are the third kind of fees that happens. So it's a combination of things, and overall put together, like as the merchant uses more and more of Razor platform, the more is our earning potential on that, and that's how it works.
Absolutely. You have been launching lots of products, right? Where is actually the more attraction? Is it online or offline now? Because people also prefer a lot of small merchants having a POS machine, having that typical QR scan code, having physical activity than a typical online payments, right? I mean, again, physical also has an online touch, but if you could give me some breakup in terms of online and offline business.
Yeah, see, I think first of all, I think the boundaries between offline and online are blurred now. And if you ask most businesses, like every business, like if you take a typical offline business, let's say let me make an example of, let's say, Jockey India, right? Like it's supposed to be an offline brand. They have about 15 to 20% of their collections online now, right? Even HUL has an online website, Amul has an online website, and so on. So the traditional offline businesses are now omni-channel. So the boundaries between online and offline are going away. The businesses are very clear that we'll go wherever the customers want, and there's at least 20-30% customers who prefer online as their preferred channel. There is a large preference of customers who prefers offline and preferred channel, and businesses don't want to miss out on any of those. And that's the reason we went on to offline, not because offline itself wasn't interesting, because we realized our businesses are on both places.
Exactly.
And there's no point of saying, hey, we only do online and somebody else only does offline. The businesses don't care. They want to meet their customers wherever they can, and we want to be there in supporting them. And the best part about India is that our core stacks are also omnichannel. So we look at UPI. UPI online and offline works same. A card works very differently in online world. You enter OTP, in offline you have to put the chip in, and then. But UPI works same. You scan the QR code, you enter the PIN, and it's done. Whether it's happening on a desktop or on a mobile or somewhere else, or you're scanning a QR code on a sticker, it doesn't really matter. So when the core infrastructure is both online and offline, the merchant is both online and offline, how could payment players say, hey, I'm only online, hey, I'm only offline? And that's what it led for us, right? So yeah, offline is new for us. As we started doing that about 2 years back, but we went through an acquisition, large acquisition, that allowed us to went quite fast into that space. We are today powering very, very large companies in that space, companies like Lenskart. We recently today announced that all the Apple reseller stores in India are going live with Razorpay on the POS offering. Using our uniquely designed POS for Apple stores in particular. Similarly, we are seeing a lot of large brands like Jockey is an example, like Decathlon is an example. Like Decathlon is a perfect example. It's online, it's offline, it's selling through quick commerce, it's selling anywhere. And we want to be there with them on all of those. So we power them in online world, we power them in offline, we power gift cards for them, we power loyalty for them.
Absolutely.
Everything that they need should be out of the box. Like, why should we differentiate if the business doesn't differentiate?
Yeah, absolutely. What I have seen in last couple of months is a lot of players have come into the PG space, right? They have got licenses, and even though players, those who don't have a PG license, still are working as a maybe TSP, doing something in the payment. So broadly, the competition is very huge. That's what I see in payments. Obviously, not maybe in B2B, but the whole payment space is getting very, very crowded. What kind of competition that you are facing, and how do you see your roadmap going ahead while beating the competition?
Yeah, I think in so many ways, I can feel that the competition actually is lower today than it used to be, let's say, 6 years back. The number of players are actually lower and it's a lot more concentrated. And the reason for that is, unlike a lot of spaces, payments, especially in the payment acquiring business, has a lot of product depth behind it. So anyone can start a payment gateway today. There's nothing stopping them. But the kind of feature depth that's needed to serve even a mid-sized business, forget enterprises, the kind of feature depth you need, it takes time. It takes time to build those out. Like we have put hundreds of millions of dollars of investment over 5-6 years to build that level of product depth. It takes a lot of time for people to build that out. So the product and feature depth that Razorpay has today, the kind of features that we launch, the kind of products that we launch on a daily, monthly level, I think nobody else in the market can match that. And that allows us to really uniquely retain our customers very deeply. I'll give you an example. Like we were not onboarding for almost a year because of the RBI embargo. And almost 80% of the merchants that we couldn't onboard, that went to our competition, actually ended up coming back to us once we started onboarding.
Interesting.
And simply because the product depth that we had, nobody else had that. So when they needed those products, they had to come back to us.
Yeah, so great, Harshit. Which segment of merchants do you think will grow far more faster than what it is now? Because we have number of offline merchants still exist in India, and tier 2, tier 3 cities of Bharat is a big market. But looking at quick commerce or the smart smart shopping, these are also emerging. So how do you see that segment going on?
I think there's a lot of topological shifts in the ecosystem, and I'll talk about one or two of those. Right? I think one is the rise of disposable income is leading to rise of very different kind of brands in the Indian ecosystem today. And these are brands targeting the premium shoppers, premium customers who are willing to pay for convenience, who are willing to pay for quality. I think that segment will grow up a lot. And that is all the D2C brands that you see. Quick commerce is a reflection of that, where customers are willing to pay the convenience to get this products in 15 minutes. They don't care about, you can take 20 rupees, 30 rupees, 100 rupees delivery charge, delivery cost or whatever, but they want the product service right now, and they want quality. So the D2C and quick commerce is an example of that, which is as an outcome of the rising disposable incomes in India. The other big factor contributing is the depth of penetration that's happening. A lot of newer type of payments are coming online today, and that is happening primarily because there are a lot more people online today than there used to be. So
Right.
things like we have started seeing people purchasing real estate online. We've started seeing
Yes,
people purchasing vehicles online and so
Yes.
on. These are segments that didn't exist online. Like nobody could
Yes.
imagine somebody buying a scooter online. Like 4 years back, you said
Yes,
somebody's
yes,
buying a scooter
yes.
online, you would laugh at
Exactly,
them.
yes.
People are doing it today. We're
Yes.
powering these, like we're powering Ether Energy, we're powering Ola Electric, we're seeing
Yes.
people buying scooters online.
Yes.
We're seeing people buy real estate online. We're powering a lot of
Yes.
real estate developers who are seeing people come online, see the layout, see the plans without visiting the site ever. They're paying booking amounts.
Huh.
So that is a segment that is a completely new phenomenon, and we're seeing great growth in that segment. The last I would say is like the rise of offline brands becoming fully omnichannel, and that was what I was giving example of earlier, like a
Yes,
Jockey India,
yes.
like an Amul, like an HUL, going online, setting up their own D2C brands equivalent, and allowing people to just buy through their websites instead of distributors or sellers. So, for example, you go to Amul and you buy something on their
Right,
website,
right.
it's generally delivered by a local distributor of Amul in that city.
Yes, yes.
But you can place the order on their website.
Right.
So those are the third kind of model, and we'll see a lot more of those emerging.
Yes.
I think overall, the basic point of all of these is that India is one of the first countries where everybody is online, everybody is digitally enabled, everybody has UPI because of which they can transfer
Yes,
money.
yes.
I think that opens up a plethora of opportunities to create new services and products on top of it.
Agreed.
What we've seen in the last 10 years is just the offline services coming online. But what we are now starting to see is online native services coming, things that are happening simply because everybody is online.
Right.
And I think that is an amazing
Yeah.
driver of the ecosystem.
Yeah. So Harshil, can you just tell us how much is your R&D spend? Is it going up because you're launching so many products, developing so many innovations?
Yeah, we don't disclose exact revenue spends, but over the years of this company, we've total raised about $600 million.
Huh.
And a majority of that is going towards R&D spend. I think at least at the minimum, we've spent about $200-ish million the last 8 years in this company in building out new products and new services, because that's the amazing opportunity in India, right? There's so many products and services needed, and we have to keep building a lot of unique products and features to service the market. In these 3 days of GFF, we are launching about at least 6 products. And in our event in March, we announced at least 8 new products. And every month or a couple of months, we are announcing a lot of new products. And this is simply because India needs so many unique solutions,
Yes.
which, forget India, nobody in the world has ever built. And that gives us a unique edge, because the kind of products and services we are building doesn't exist anywhere else. And that's why we are now taking these products, not just in India, we're taking it to other markets. We're launching Malaysia, we're launching other markets, simply because these products and solutions don't exist anywhere else.
Sure. What next for you, Harshil? You have made billions of value for more than $1 billion for sure. You are already profitable, which many other fintechs are struggling to. And in fact, because of not profitable and sustainability, they are unable to raise funds also. So what next for you? I obviously aware about your listing plans, but what next now?
Yeah, it's like we're still at very early stages of opportunity sizing in India. There's a large market, and this is expected to grow a lot more. I think it's just a starting point for us. So I'll say there are 5 or 6 things I'm particularly excited about. Of course, online payments. The rapid growth of online payments still continues, and I feel it's still going to continue for a longer years. As I spoke about some of the new trends, there's a lot more opportunities opening up. So we'll see that. Offline payments is new for us. We're still early. And I feel that in the next couple of years, it will contribute to at least 20-30% of our revenues as we scale up on that. Then Razorpay, which is a new banking side, very early days, growing more than 70-80% year over year. And I think we see a lot of value coming out of that. Then international. We launched in Malaysia. We're looking at launching in other markets and taking the India fintech story globally.
Right.
And that is another opportunity. So I feel all in all, I think it's while we generate a lot of value and create a lot of potential for ourselves and our investors, we feel there's it's still a starting point.
Right.
The overall value that we can generate from through Razorpay and through the products and services and through our team, I think is at least 10x, if not 100x from here.
So my last question was specifically about the global south, and since you are also trying to expand abroad, what is going to be your strategy? Which markets are you going to target, and what kind of potential do you see specifically in the other geographies? Because India is now betting really high on the global south, and they think that because of the DPI, UPI, and all our digital models, we have a greater scope over there. So how will you start? I mean, you have already started, but how will you?
So we launched in Malaysia.
Yes.
We feel that almost entire Southeast Asia is a target market for us, which is Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, and so on, Singapore. And we'll launch a lot of these markets in the next couple of years. Of course, each of these has their own demands and regulatory challenges we have to go through. But we feel that all of these markets are going to be interesting for us. I think DPI story is interesting, and that's the reason we're going in these markets. Like almost all of these markets are looking up to India from a fintech vision perspective. That they are looking at India's fintech vision and trying to replicate that. I think there's a great opportunity for companies like ours.
Right.
To give an example, like most of the internet companies in the world today came from US because internet came from US. So any company which was successful in the US market on internet was naturally successful when internet comes to India, when internet comes to Brazil and so on. So that's why you have Google and Facebook and Microsoft. I think there's a similar opportunity for Indian fintech companies. As India's DPI goes global, as India's UPI goes global, it's an opportunity for players like us who are built in this market, who are built on top of DPI, who's built on top of UPI, to take that story into other markets like Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, and others. As they are looking up to India's fintech vision, we can go out and build on top of those, on top of their DPIs, and replicate the story that we built in India. I think that's what we are chasing, and we feel that's an amazing opportunity to be a part of.
Okay. Tell me something about you. I'm done with my specific questions on the merchant Razorpay business, but tell me something about you. I heard that you're not just a CEO, but you also code. You do coding on yourself also. So where do you spend more time, coding and innovating, or looking at the balance sheet and the profitability of the company?
Yeah, I spend much less time coding than I want to. Simply because there's a lot more time I have to go spend in meetings and reviewing and giving directions. But I do still code in my personal time. So whenever I have free, I'm free and I have my own thing. I do a lot of projects. I do a lot of side projects of my own where I have to code.
That's interesting. And where do you, lastly, if we take a final roadmap of maybe 6 to 7 years, why I'm taking that roadmap, Harshil, is very simple, because everybody feels that India is going to be a dominating country, maybe perhaps third largest country in the world, and our GDP will be doubled by 2030, So where do you see Razorpay? Where do you see the fintech industry also by then?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and the reason it's interesting is a lot of times when I meet people today, they ask, hey, the fintech in India is done, it's already big and it's scaled up, what next? I feel it's still very early. Like you look at the event and GFF and you look at the kind of excitement that there is, the kind of excitement, not just in India anymore, it's now global excitement. Like the world is excited about what India is doing in fintech. So I think from that perspective, there's a lot more opportunity in terms of scaling this up, enabling this. There's still a lot of new things opening up, like the RBI ULI that was launched a couple of days. That's an amazing opportunity. The way payments have been democratized by UPI, credit is going to get democratized by ULI. I think that's an amazing opportunity. We've not even touched it yet. Similarly, like a lot of stuff happening on the UPI credit card side or UPI credit line side, alternate authentication, like B2B payments is one big area which is still not being touched. I think we've just scratched the surface. So I expect that the India fintech opportunity is at least 10x from here.
Fantastic. I will stop here on that note. All the best for your next journey, and thank you so much for being part of Fintech Diary.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting me.
Thank you. And thank you so much for watching Fintech Diary. Keep watching and stay tuned to etbfsi.com. Thank you.